Hello and welcome to our live. Today we're going to discuss childless motherhood and how child custody within the legal system tortures women who are often already the victim of domestic violence. We are going to invite Dr. Tracy King. We'll take a moment and invite her now. And Dr. Tracy and I have been working together for quite a while now on really complex topics, and it's always such a pleasure to have her on our call. This is going to be focused on the trauma of motherhood, the trauma on women, and as we can, hi, Dr. Tracy, thanks for joining
Hello,
us
hi.
today. Hey. And I was just saying, we're going to focus on the experience of traumatic motherhood in the context of childless motherhood when it comes to child custody. And of course, there are fathers in a very difficult situation, and we're not discounting that. But today we will be focusing on the female experience, the motherhood experience, and how that is embodied and how that is a biological factor within the trauma that is experienced by mothers. Yeah. So welcome.
Hello, hi. Yeah, and I think that's important to give it that context that we're not saying that fathers are not important, but we're coming from the perspective of that word you said, embodied, and looking at the hormones and how, for example, oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and then we have estrogen that heightens, and then our progesterone heightens. All of these things kind of activate our threat detection and prime us to be able to recognize different cries in a baby, like prolactin, which is our milk producing hormone, allows us to sort of be motivated to respond to our babies. And those things start right at the very beginning. Of course, different people have different responses to things, but we are hardwired to keep ourselves with our babies to keep them safe. So that's our starting point.
100%. And
Mm,
I think on the one hand, it's obviously a positive that the court system has been like, hey, fathers should be fathers, fathers should be more involved. I also think
mm,
that has crossed into the sanctity of
mm,
what the biology of motherhood looks like. Because at the end of the day, in the animal
mm,
kingdom, in the mammal kingdom, mothers are hardwired. It's not a choice that these mothers make.
mm,
They're hardwired to take care of their young.
mm,
And even in the human world, it happens all the time where someone has
mm,
become a father and they don't know they've become a father, right? So there
mm,
is a certain embodiment to this trauma when a mother is separated from her child, because
mm,
hormonally, biologically, this separation is
mm,
something that has been, it's almost like losing an arm in a very
mm,
physiological sense. So that's why we're
mm.
focusing on the female experience today.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think the story sort of begins really with when women are in controlling and coercive relationships, very sort of soon into being parents, often then the child becomes that pawn in negotiation, and there is this threat that the children will be taken, and that sort of starts to embed, and the seed is planted at that stage. And then what starts to happen is that then feeds into the woman's self-perception, and she starts to maybe even be self-critical of her own mothering skills at that stage, even before court systems have been involved or a separation has occurred. And then we see that replicating itself outside of the relationship. So once the separation occurs, there might even be a bit of a honeymoon period where it works okay. And then the controlling and the coercive behavior then happens with repeated court hearings, with accusations, allegations of things. And we see that just continuing and continuing. And then what happens is the court sort of gets involved in that narrative and takes on board often that controlling and coercive narrative. Now, obviously, they don't always, but that can happen. I'm just
So
looking at
what you're
4
saying,
million hearts. Yeah, sorry.
yeah,
I'm listening to
yeah.
you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so what we're
Yeah.
saying is
Mm,
essentially, as part in the context of domestic
mm,
violence, what often happens is these women are, let's say they're being physically abused, financially
mm,
abused, psychologically abused, and this motherhood instinct says, let me protect myself and my child, right? I know I have many friends
mm,
who have had to hide in the bathroom, hide in closets,
mm,
have had to ask
mm,
other family members for food, when it comes to financial abuse. And so these are mothers
mm,
oftentimes that have had to um,
mm,
remove their child from that type of domestic abuse situation, right?
Mm,
And in that context, she's framed as hysterical, alienating, she's the
mm,
abusive one, and the narrative gets flipped onto her. And it's
mm,
saying she's the unstable one, she's the alienating one, instead
mm,
of instead of saying domestic violence happens. I mean, 1 in 3 women are suffer from sexual abuse. 1 in 2 women suffer from
mm,
sexual harassment, right? Like gendered violence is a huge problem on this earth.
mm,
And instead of, you know, having a system that believes women and says, I understand this is a domestic
mm,
violence situation. How can we navigate this together? You know,
mm.
this is, she's framed as hysterical.
Yeah.
She's framed as, disbelievable.
Mm,
She's framed as being the crazy one. So this
yeah.
is the starting point of what happens after that, right?
Absolutely, and I'm just reading For Healing Hearts is saying that their outcome sounds like a good one, where he's stepped back and actually she has custody of the children by looking at that. But obviously that isn't always the outcome, and that's great that that's happened in that situation. It looks like it was a long and arduous and probably really traumatic experience, and I think that's the thing I wanted to talk about. Is this is a detachment trauma. When children are taken in this way, it's not just the experience of the coercion and the controlling relationship. Then there's the wrench of the attachment trauma. And then if the court systems are involved, there's completely being let down by anything and everyone that you thought might protect you. So there's complete isolation that we're talking about here, which activates our nervous system, which puts us into fight or flight. It can then create situations, as you're saying, like a mother perhaps frantically emailing services and saying, what's happening, where are my children, when can I see them, what's going on? And then that reactive way of being is then fed into a perception of, this woman's unstable, she can't contain her emotions, she's, everything that he has said is therefore true. But what we're looking at is an escalation within the context of the threat for the woman.
100%.
Mm, mm,
And so I know that we had quite a few talking
mm,
points about this. And the next
mm,
one was, because of this hormonal attachment, sometimes women are framed as, I can't, like, she must be
mm,
crazy if she doesn't have connection with her children, and
mm,
the judge framed her as
mm,
this crazy hysterical woman, she must
mm,
therefore be crazy. And then women are judged and, seen as, oh,
mm,
she had a child or two or three or four children and she doesn't have
mm,
access to any of them, she must really be crazy. And there's this lack of understanding within, I think,
mm,
within the world that we live in towards women in general, saying if a woman says she's been harassed, she's probably been harassed. If she says she's been,
mm,
she's suffering domestic violence, it's probably true. The
mm,
statistics are all there. If she's been framed as crazy, hysterical, and had her children torn away from her in the
mm,
court system, that often happens as part of
mm,
this misogynistic narrative around women being called hysterical. So I
mm,
think that's also something very difficult for women to go through life with,
mm,
being seen as, oh, this woman must be crazy because she doesn't have any access to her children anymore. And that is a very difficult way to move forward with your life as a woman as well, along with this
mm,
attachment trauma that we're talking
mm,
about, saying, how
mm,
are you waking up every day and going about your day and
mm,
with these maternal instincts? So you're continuously
mm,
experiencing maternal instincts, such as, where are my children? Scanning the environment. Do I hear
mm,
someone call mom? That must be
mm,
me. It's like very deep, hardwired hormonal protective factors that we're
mm,
navigating, while also being called, how crazy are you for
mm,
wanting to know where your child is, how your child is, to
mm,
be with your child, right?
mm.
So it's a very complex situation that women are forced to navigate in these heavy situations.
Absolutely. And, in our earlier conversation, we were saying that if a woman just suddenly, I can just see with For Healing Hearts, they said I was heavily losing hope, and if a woman does stop reaching out, does stop trying to contact her children or stops the emails, it's kind of like then they are seen as a woman that's failing to protect or a woman that's failing to want to maintain a relationship. So it's kind of like a double bind. It's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And it's a really difficult position to be in because there isn't that sensitivity to it. It's like all the expectation is on the mother to adapt to whatever is happening and be the one to put the children first, but it isn't always being considered that that isn't what's happening from the father's perception in these particular types of cases.
100%. And we also
Mm,
discuss, what are people telling you as the mom that has no access to your children? what are people telling you as a woman? And often it's, oh,
Mm.
don't worry, the kids will turn 18 and then they'll come back to you. And you're like, oh
Mm.
my goodness. So never
Yeah.
tell someone, don't worry, they'll turn 18 and come back to you.
Mm.
That's like saying when your child has
Mm.
no more childhood left to them and they're an
Mm.
adult, then you can like somewhat reconnect with them. It's a terrible thing to tell a woman. The other thing
Cheers.
that happens, right? The other thing that happens that comes up very often is they're like, okay, well, don't worry when they're 18. Parental alienation is programming a child for years and decades
Mm.
that
Mhm.
to believe that their mother is
Mm.
crazy, to believe
Mm.
that they should have no connection with their mother. Sometimes it takes people until their 30s and 40s to come back to their mother. It doesn't even happen at 18,
Mm.
right? And
Absolutely. And
yeah,
I was saying earlier, I've worked on cases where there's an accusation that the mother has narcissistic personality disorder, when actually, when I've come in to do an expert assessment for the courts, it turns out that that's the father that has the personality disorder, but the father has really entrenched that alienation against the mother with the children, that it then takes a number of years for that relationship to be reintegrated in a safe way, because the children are terrified of their mum, not because of things that the mum has done, but because of the alienation process.
100%. And
Mm.
so, and that's a big thing that's often misunderstood.
Mm.
And the other question that comes up is, well, oh, don't worry, at least he's a good father. Isn't he a good father? And you have to ask yourself, well, we all can say about parenting, the one key factor of what is a good parent is, can you put your child's needs before your own, right?
Mm.
And so when you take away a mother from a child's life because of your need for power, control, domination, your need to be
Mm.
the only one that they can hold on to because you've alienated everybody else from their lives, right? Or anybody that doesn't have your
Mm.
narrative.
Mm.
So with all of this, are you a good father? Well,
Mm.
no, that's not being a good father, especially in domestic violence
Mm.
situations. I'm trying to choke your mother to death and to harm your mother and to break her leg,
Mm.
but I'm a really good father. Is a good father wanting his child to have a mother who's half broken, not alive, and disappeared? Obviously not, right? So
And
yeah,
and also, you know, with alienation, when a father even says throwaway kind of sidelined comments about a mum, what they're forgetting is that that child knows that they are part of that mother. So you're also damaging your child's core identity when you're saying those negative remarks and you're not putting them in any kind of balance. So it's not just about pushing the mother away. You know, there is damage that is done, that's really happening to that child, because although the child may not have the cognition to say, oh, that they're saying negative things about mum, so that means me, but that is happening at a very biological root, because there is that genetic connection.
100%. And I see
Mm.
somebody else is
Mm.
commenting about the children being put on drugs. That's you know, I've seen
Mm.
and observed that many times within domestic violence situations where
Mm.
the father will
Mm.
medicate the children or
Mm.
have the children with different psychiatric conditions saying, oh, this child
Mm.
must be depressed, put them on this. This child must be
Mm.
disobedient, put them on this. So that is also another form of control, pharmaceutical control,
Mm.
saying, let me subdue these children through
Mm.
drugs. You know, so
Mm.
once you take away a protective factor such as a mother from these children's lives, it opens them up to this whole slew of
Mm.
really like even more traumatic and
Absolutely.
violent experiences. So I think that's also not taken into
Mm.
account when people are like, oh, let's just take the mother out the picture. Like, wow,
Mm.
that is one vulnerable child taking a
Mm.
protective mother out of this child's life. It's an
Mm.
unsafe, you know, 99.9% of the time, it's an unsafe decision to make, you know.
Absolutely. And with, you know, with assessments that I do, I will often look at the system and what's, you know, when we're thinking about therapy, we talk about transference and how dynamics that are outside of the therapy room coming to into the therapy room, and that's exactly the same in courtrooms. Dynamics within the relationship come into the court arena, so there will be splitting, there'll be, particularly if there's a personality disorder involved where there's a fragmentation of the person's sense of self, there'll be certain professionals that kind of, it shouldn't be this way, but we are human and people need supervision and help around it, but there'll be certain professionals that will side with the dad. There'll be certain ones that are trying to still give the voice of the mum, but there won't, you know, it's about trying to get as much neutrality and independence as possible within the systems. And often that's why an expert is called in, but we're not actually often called in to look at the system. You know, that's something, that's one of the tacks that I will take. But the questions we're asked are always about the individuals, not the dynamics of the system and how the system is maintaining the same control and coercion that we've seen within the relationship.
100%. And
Mm,
that's also a big part of personality disorders, being extremely
mm,
charming, being extremely convincing, the
mm,
ability to remain calm. You know, look how
mm,
frantic the mother is, but look how calm and you know, wonderful the father presents, right? Because he's so calm and charming and he cracks
mm,
a joke here and there. He must be a great dad, right? And that's part of the charming side of the personality disorder that often
mm,
is overlooked within the court system. Like, yes, mother would be frantic. She's separated
mm,
from her children, or she's trying to
oh,
protect them from abuse. You know,
mm,
it's justifiable in this context to be frantic and to be anxious
mm,
and to have that flight response as a protective mother with
yeah,
this hormonal attachment to your child. So all of
mm,
that is a part of the story that seems to be within the court system totally derailed in the name of this, and you know, this larger misogynistic narrative in the patriarchy, which is women are hysterical, women can't be relied
mhm.
on, women must be crazy, and men are reliable, trust men, right?
Absolutely. And I think sometimes, again, an unconscious bias is sometimes there is a path of least resistance. So in some of the cases where there's been that projection around narcissistic personality disorder, where the man has accused that of the woman, and then actually when the assessment's been done, it's been the reverse. To suddenly speak to a male with narcissistic personality disorder for the court systems, what I've often seen is people are kind of nervous about how to manage that and how to do it. And actually, there are some real risks involved because that person's whole sense of self is being held together by the role and the narrative that they have created. So the minute an expert comes in and says, actually, no, it's you, not her, that person's whole defensive mechanism, their whole narrative is going to completely crumble. And when that happens, then the children are potentially at risk. So lots of negotiations have to happen where the children have to be removed whilst someone's in a court hearing. There's lots of things that have to happen that are quite scary for professionals to be involved in. So it's a really tricky situation to be in. But I think, you know, obviously those things do have to happen because the risk of harm to the children happens in those moments.
100%. And
Mm,
that ties back into domestic violence. When is you know, and I'll use the woman in this context because oftentimes this is
mm,
when women are killed, women are murdered, the
mm,
highest frequency statistically when they're trying to leave. And so people don't have a large conversation, but the
mm,
same thing if a child tries to leave, they're trying to run away. This
mm,
is the highest risk of violence. And you will hear stories of, yes, you know, the parents shot the child because they, you know, they wanted to get away, or they were being separated from the child, or as a form of power and control. So this is
yeah,
just the same statistical relevance of, hey, the victim is trying to run away. Be very careful because this is the highest risk
mm.
of violence. And that goes for the child too, as you're saying.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it moves on to that sense of, you know, when a woman has been separated from her children and they are out there somewhere, like you were saying at the start, with the scanning for that child, the scanning for the baby, the listening. It's like an ambiguous grief. It's not a grief, it's a grief without closure because the mother knows that they are there, and every day that passes is another day where you've lost a part of their childhood and you're not going to get that back. So that whole thing about them coming back at 18 when they can, you're still grieving that lost childhood, that lost sense of being alongside them.
100%. And it looks like
Mm.
For Healing Hearts is saying that she's had an
Mm.
incredibly difficult time, and for years and
Yeah.
years she never gave
Mm.
up. And I think a part of this narrative that's coming up with For
Mm.
Healing Hearts is that's not what motherhood should look like. And that in itself
Mm.
is
Mm.
it's really it's a loss because this is a loss of motherhood.
Mm.
This is a loss of childhood. This is not what childhood should look like. It's not what
Mm.
motherhood should look like. And as you're saying, this is a grieving
Mm.
process where,
Yeah.
you know, this is even when I was with my children
Mm.
during these months or years, it was under duress. It was with
Mm.
abuse. It was with threats. It was,
Mm.
in hiding and all of that. I mean, that's not what motherhood and childhood should look like. So it's still, as you're saying, it's a
Mm.
very, very complex grief, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, having to hold all of that, like when's the next court hearing? What's going to happen next? What's the next threat going to be? That takes away a mother's presence to be there fully present with her child. And that's no fault of that mother because we're all human. And if those things were happening to any of us, none of us would be present. So it's about understanding, what's the impact of the current situation rather than, was this how the mother was before? And did she need some help before? Or is it a reaction to what's happening now?
100%. I know we had a
Mm.
list. Was there anything else on our list that we wanted to cover for this
Mm.
particular topic that you can?
I think it was maybe just saying a little bit more about the judgments of other people and the kind of unhelpful things that they say. I know we've covered that, but I think it's I've worked with women in therapy about how did they tell other people that they make friends with that not had they don't have the custody of their children because of those instant judgments, and it's maybe working on a kind of spiel and a narrative that works and feels comfortable for you. Because again, that, if a woman sort of is very emotive and very active and says, oh, I was in a controlling and coercive relationship and I lost my children, I've often seen people reporting, people don't believe me because I look kind of a bit unstable when I'm telling my story. People think that I can't contain my emotions and then they think it must have been me. Because I think for society, it's really hard for them to think that a mother does do something wrong. So when somebody says that perhaps she has, it's almost like they have to see her as something different and completely vilify her in order to protect their own sense of what motherhood should be and what we're taught that it should be. So again, I think there's a really complex system that's happening there when people have those judgmental responses to mothers in this situation.
100%. And I think going back
Mm.
to mammalian behavior, like we're human, we're mammals. And when
Mm.
we look at whales, when we look at
Mm.
lions, if you take away their
Mm.
child, they're livid. They're running after the child.
Mm.
They're never the same, right? This is a
Mm.
mammal being separated from her cub or from whatever, whatever
Mm.
mammal this is. So point is, I think the same thing when we look at a
Mm.
woman and she's telling her story of how she's been separated from her child. Of
Mm.
course, if she's not activated
Mm.
in a fight, flight, freeze, and whatever response, I would be surprised,
Mm.
and which is okay too. But I'm just saying, like, of course, the woman is going to present as completely
Yeah.
derailed, being separated from
Mhm.
her children. You would expect that of any mammal, right?
Yeah,
So I think
absolutely.
that's also it. And I
Mm.
see from Four Healing Hearts, we're going
Mm.
into the next part of our live that I wanted to go to as well. So how
Mm.
to heal through these situations.
Mm.
Um, I think it's like we were saying before
Mm.
on our call, so, it is such a process. It is
Mm.
being able to say that today I will take one moment to offer my
Mm.
body a sense of, even if it's less pain, a sense of less pain,
Mm.
a sense of less grief, a sense of grounding. I will
Mm.
touch into my five senses and
Mm.
look around me, see, smell, taste, hear, feel. Your
Mm.
body deserves to feel a moment of respite. Your
Mm.
body deserves to feel a moment of pleasure. Can it? Not
Mm.
always. Maybe your
Mm.
body cannot feel relaxed today or tomorrow or the day after. But the point is, I think as women, as mothers, it is important to stop and say, my body deserves to feel loved, supported, a moment of
Mm.
presence. Try and offer your body a somatic exercise, a moment of dance, even if it's not a happy dance. It could be a
Mm.
sad dance, a moment of music, a moment of coffee. A
Mm.
therapist. We have Dr. Tracy who does therapy. We have me who does somatic and movement-based trauma coaching, support, love. Um, this is an ongoing complex grief, and it's not going to disappear, but it gets better you you're able to
Mm.
slowly teach your nervous system. My story does not have to live within my body 100%. Maybe
Mm.
it can live within my body less than that, maybe 50% or 10% or 5%, as we can help work with the body itself. Because we were saying that this is an
Mm.
embodied trauma. This child was in your
Mm.
body. The body remembers. We're not going to forget our children or every moment and every day that we wish we could have been with them, right? It's embodied. You know, at the same time, yeah, it's complex. It's
Yes.
something that I think a lot of people do not address. And I'm really glad that we're addressing this huge issue here,
Mm.
and we're holding space for the women, for the
Mm.
mothers that are struggling, that have been um,
Mm.
overly, repeatedly abused by a system that they have been trying to leave, such as abuse and
Mm.
violence. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think also what's really hard is that integration of children back into being with a mother if they've been with a father where there has been this dynamic, because what can often happen psychologically is the children can split and then alienate the father. Now, the father may be too risky to have ongoing contact, but the children have somehow got to integrate that is still their biological father. So, what kind of narrative are they given around that? And how is the story shared in an age appropriate way that holds that in mind in some way? And often that's when therapy needs to happen for all of the professionals working with the family to agree on what that narrative will be and how that will be shared with the children depending on their age and each of their needs, essentially, because that integration of lost time with mum needs to be processed, and some sort of narrative around dad. Yeah, I see that he isn't allowed contact for a long time, which is appropriate, obviously if there's risks, but it's thinking about how do the children make sense of that and what kind of narrative is given to them. Because what you don't want is, again, dad's all bad. The behavior may have been really bad, and he may be all bad, and we might think that, but actually the children still need to find a way to hold on to the fact that they genetically came from him, because if they see him as all bad and mum as all good now, then they have a split within their sense of self and their development, and so that's got to be managed really carefully.
100%. And I think that's a part
Mm.
of the narrative that the court system creates that's also complex, because
Mm.
I think it's important to say when we're raising a child, we say this behavior is okay, this behavior is not okay, right? So to say,
Yeah. Mm.
your dad has great teeth, your dad is a great surfer, your dad is da da da, but his behavior of X, Y, and Z was not okay,
Mm.
because this is part of raising humans, to say it's okay to say this behavior is not
Mm.
okay. You as a mom, your behavior of, incessantly doing X, Y, and Z may not be the greatest and the healthiest, and
Mm.
say it, right? I'm not perfect. These are, don't take
Mm.
after me in this way. Your dad is great at this, but he definitely wasn't okay in doing this and that and the other. And just to be able to say, it doesn't have to be my mom is perfect, my dad is perfect, but to
Mm.
say, these are positive and negatives about your mom. These are
Mm.
positive and negatives about your dad. It's okay to say these
Mm.
behaviors were not okay, because if we raise children thinking that choking and banging on
Mm.
doors and smashing things, oh, I'm not allowed to say bad about, the parent. Well, we also need to
Mm.
teach children that it's not okay to damage people and
Yeah.
property, and that's the complex
Mm.
messaging, a part of the narrative.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And also I think from the mother's perspective, doing what we've just said is the right thing for the child's development, but it may not be the right thing for you. So how do you release the fact that you've had to present things in a balanced way, where internally you're quite right, you probably don't feel balanced and you probably don't want to do that. How do you release that in some different way? So that's coming back to what you were talking about. And I think somatics works really well to, do an angry dance, do something where you're releasing something, or write something down, do something that's going to acknowledge that actually you might feel different to how you are trying to present in a balanced way to your children.
Yeah, 100%. And that's
Mm.
part of parenting, right? It's being able to put your
Mm.
child's needs in that
Mm.
sense above your own, and hey,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
100%. Is
yeah.
there anything else?
Mm.
Anybody have any other questions about um,
Mm.
this whole situation about child custody being used to torment women in domestic abusive situations? If anybody has a question, feel free to drop it before
Mm.
we wrap things up. And Dr. Tracy, if there's
Mm.
anything else that comes to mind that you want to
Mm.
chat about before we wrap up,
Yeah.
it would be great. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think we've covered quite a lot.
Yeah, we have. But I
Mm.
think, yeah, just to wrap it up, it's like, I think what's the hard part is this is a patriarchal world that we live in. It's a patriarchal
Mm.
system. Violence against women happens in many ways. 1 in 2 women are harassed,
Mm.
1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted.
Mm.
Um, Gendered violence is a woman's problem. This is something where if we can just begin to believe women, I would say is my takeaway point. Believe women, because then everything will be easier, better, and
Mm.
can be more effectively navigated instead of shutting
Mm.
down and ignoring women. I think
Yeah.
that would be a big takeaway, you know?
Absolutely. I guess I'm just thinking, like with I have these random thoughts at times and I share them and we'll see if it goes anywhere. But with for example, a firearm, if somebody uses a toy firearm and goes into a bank and they've got there's that intent of kind of harming people, we believe that the people perceived that they were going to be harmed. And I think sometimes with controlling and coercive behavior, we have to enter what is the perception of that, even if the person's intent wasn't that, because they've come from maybe a family where that's been the norm. How has it been perceived? It doesn't have to be a real firearm to actually do the damage, I guess is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So it's like
Mm.
what environment did they believe they were in at the time, right? So that's a big
Yeah,
one.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Mm.
Yeah. So once again, thank you everyone for joining. We're going to post this live for everybody to see, to hear, to listen to. Dr. Tracy is an incredible resource, and you offer one-on-one therapy, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Yes. I do also trauma coaching. I work more with the body and the nervous system. Rewires programs are available affordably, and they're all pre-recorded for whoever wants to work
Mm.
with the nervous system and dance therapy, music therapy, anything nonverbal. This was such an important topic, so close to my heart. Dr. Tracy, you're incredible as usual. Thank you so much for having this live with me.
Thank you for inviting me. See you later. Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.